It's pretty cool.
All right. Hello and welcome, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Building an International Community of Accessibility Professionals. My name is Kevin Hauer, and I'm with IAAP, and I am joined today by my colleagues Rachel Paul and Dr. Christopher Lee, also with IAAP. Before we kick things off here, I just want to review a couple of technical things with everyone. You should be connected to the Zoom webinar platform or listening along over the phone. Either is fine. If you are connected to Zoom, but also are listening to the audio over the phone, you might be receiving double audio. If that's the case, you have two options. You can either hang up the phone and listen via your computer, or you can mute your computer speakers and continue listening via the phone, whichever option works best for you. To guard against background noise, all attendees have been put on mute by default. But our panelists do intend to take some questions throughout the session today. So when we reach those pauses for questions, if you would like to ask your questions verbally, please let us know in the chat. I will be happy to enable your microphone. We just ask that you go back on mute once you have asked your question. For those of you who would prefer to ask in another format, please put your questions into the Q&A as we go. Go ahead and just put them in as they occur to you, so we have a nice list of questions for our speaker when we do pause for questions. Finally, this session is being recorded, so a recorded version of this will be available after the fact. As well, we will send out the slide deck for everyone too. So without further ado, I would like to turn things over to Dr. Lee to introduce today's speaker.
All right, thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Rachel. And welcome, everyone. This is a great webinar that we have planned for you today. We have the amazing Frances West with us, who I will introduce in just a moment. The title of the presentation is Authentic Inclusion, Accessibility Leaders in Action. And we've got a full hour with Frances West. The way we're going to set this up is she's got a brief presentation she's going to be sharing with us, and then we're going to open it up for questions. I've got a few questions myself after reading her book, and I have totally butchered this, as I mentioned earlier. It's a great book, so hopefully y'all will have the opportunity to pick it up sometime. As I mentioned, my name is Christopher Lee. I want to just share with you just a few minutes about IAAP. We have a lot of folks on this webinar right now that don't know much about IAAP. They're new to our announcements coming out. So let me just give you a little bit about what we do and who we are. We started 5 years ago. It was with private, as well as nonprofit organizations, as well as grassroots disability organizations. And they came together 5 years ago and started to think about how they could promote the accessibility profession. And what came out of it was IAAP. And they focused on three primary areas. One of them is certification. As you see on your screen right now, we've got 3 certifications, with 2 certifications and a designation. The first one is our Certified Professionals in Accessibility Core Competency, otherwise known as CPAC. And it focuses on disabilities, laws and standards, universal design, and assistive technology. And then we also have the WASP, which is the Web Accessibility Specialist. And it focuses on issues around web applications, solutions around web applications, and remediation. That's how those 2 certifications are set up. If you get those 2, you have a designee of our CPWA. We have lots of possibilities of other certifications coming up. We're kind of looking what is needed out there. We've been looking at procurement and some other ones, which I'll talk about in just a second. The second area, so we've got certification being first. The second area is professional and organizational development. And we do this in many areas. We have an annual conference called Enabling Summit, which is in June in DC. We do professional webinar series as just individual webinars as you're attending right now. We focused a lot in our sector areas, which is higher education, finance, insurance. We have one going right now in the digital workplace inclusion. So please check them out when you have a chance. And then we also, having trouble with this, sorry. We also have networking. So we've got certification, development, and networking. And we have several areas that we engage our members with networking. We have a career center. We've got community of practices. We've got an online environment that you can actually go into these different community practices and post questions and share. So those are some of the areas that we have. That particular online environment is called Connections. So again, that's another service that we offer, kind of a benefit to our members. We also have several initiatives that are popping up with our organization. In 2020, we'll be launching our Speakers Bureau. Now, this Speakers Bureau came about mainly because our members wanted to ensure that they were looking for individuals for workshops, seminars, and so on that have been vetted through our volunteer organization. So we've got the Speakers Bureau that's launching coming in 2020. We have an educational training database that we're launching. This is something that's been in the works for about 2 years now with one of our committees. And the whole idea of it is that there would be global resources regarding ICT accessibility as well as physical environments, actually. And so these will be free resources as well as paid resources out there. So be on the lookout. There's information on the website about that. And I mentioned a few minutes ago that we are exploring different avenues regarding micro certifications. And one of the ones that have come to our attention, hence why we're doing this webinar, one of the reasons why I tracked Frances down and drug her in here, was really around strategic leadership accessibility. And so that is something that we're really focusing on. We have a task group being led by Jody Grill from Shell Oil and Neil Milligan from Atos, that's looking at what it is, what's the job responsibility of leadership, someone that's in a leadership position, not so much a CAO, but just someone that's in the leadership position. So if you want more information about that, definitely check it out. The last thing I just want to mention before my introduction to Frances is that, and this ties to kind of our networking aspect, is that we have a monthly newsletter that goes out and weekly kind of week in review e-newsletters that go out. So if you're interested, these are free. You can go to our website, which is right there, and check us out and sign up. We would love to have you part of the community, whether you're a member or not. Okay, so now I've got the great opportunity to introduce to you Frances West. Frances is a colleague. She's somewhat of a mentor to me. Frances, you may not know that, but you are, as well as a friend. I have her resume in front of me right now, and if I would take some time to read through it, we'd be here like half the day. So I'm going to summarize it a little bit. Frances is the founder of the Frances West Corporation, which is a global strategy advisor company, works with public, private, and nonprofit and startups, and operating inclusion as a core business philosophy, thus driving disruptive innovation. Frances was IBM, as much of you may know. Frances was IBM's first chief accessibility officer. At IBM, she worked to establish IT accessibility standards, policy, and develop a human-centered enterprise technology, centric enterprise technology. Frances is a sought-after author, a public speaker, and strategy advisor on digital inclusion, accessibility, women in tech, and human-centric technology innovation. So Frances, without ado, please jump in here. It's so great to have you today.
Well, thank you, Christopher. With that kind of introduction, always make me feel like I'm really old because it takes a long time to go through that.
You're a prodigy. You were young when you started this stuff.
Well, anyway, this is a great honor to be on the IAAP. For those of you who don't know, IBM actually was one of the founding member of IAAP. We saw the kind of a trend of accessibility becoming much more mainstream, and really supported the idea that we need to have a professional track for people who really want to specialize in this area, and including myself. Like Christopher said, that I actually worked for IBM for 30 plus years, and for the first 25 years actually was in the mainstream, you can call it mainstream technology sales and marketing area. But then I had a chance to really get involved in accessibility accidentally. But once I start getting involved in it, you know, it was just such a powerful a topic, in that for the first time I felt like I can really, you know, really kind of dedicate the team to really deliver what I believe as a human-centered based value proposition to our customers. So from there, I really worked on but then because I'm an accidental accessibility person or a digital inclusion person, what I realized also was that there was a lot of effort has been actually being expended by people who has passion in this area. But in order to make this topic a global topic, a business imperative, we have to have a different way of thinking about this and different way of communicating the value proposition, especially not just to the senior executive, but the top of the business, meaning the C-suite, the CEOs, the board members. So, so that actually has been my kind of my personal focus is how do I engage a business community, both the for-profit, nonprofit, or startup, or government, the decision maker at the highest level, and then really articulate the value of what we're doing here. Accessibility is really the articulation of what I call the inclusion. But then how do we make sure that people don't just talk the talk? Because as we all know, there's a lot of talk about inclusion, but how do we authentically operationalize inclusion? So that became kind of the major thesis of my book and also my company's offerings. But to kind of step back, you heard the term authentic inclusion. So what is authentic inclusion? On next chart, it kind of gives you the definition. To me, Christopher, can you be a good driver? So the authentic inclusion in this case is for the business leaders at the highest level to understand that this is not just an HR kind of program, right? This is not just an initiative. At the core, if you have diversity with humanity, you're going to have better and the best innovation. And I say that from experience because my organization in IBM was actually located or in the IBM research. So that's where the innovation comes from. So, and I have people who are blind scientists, deaf engineers working on my team. And I was completely blown away by the creativity and the out-of-box thinking that they have. So first concept is that really diversity is just a programmatic approach, but at the core of a company's innovation. And then the second kind of a main idea that the authentic inclusion introduces that for any institution, organization, if you're going to do inclusion, which everybody seems to pledge that they want to do, we have seen, the business roundtable, we have seen, CEO actions, everybody wants to do inclusion or say they want to do inclusion, but do you have a holistic approach, right? Do you really meet the individual based on their ability or based on their gender, based on their cultural background, where they are? So that is a very key idea, is that you got to have a holistic view and holistic approach in operationalizing this whole concept into your business core. And then last but not the least is that, to me, this is the only way to go forward. I think both as a country, or as business, as a country, as a society, we are entering a very different phase where I think especially the younger generation, the millennials coming in, they do expect the business and everybody to have an alignment of value. In this case, any company, even if you're a startup, and actually the most encouraging part that I've seen is, like Christopher said, I actually spend quite a bit of my time providing advisory services to startups. And I definitely see a new generation of startup that wants to align their the purpose along with their profit. And then I think those are going to be the breed of companies that are going to survive and sustain their growth, in the long term. So that is the kind of basic definition of authentic inclusion. Now, why is it a business imperative? Like, can you go to the next chart, please? And then I think to me, there is actually a sense of urgency here, and why now, right? So the next chart actually speaks to, I see a 4 mega trends that's coming at us. First and foremost, next chart, is really demographic. And I think everybody knows that the aging demographic is upon us. And when you age, you automatically acquire disabilities. I mean, nobody can escape that. And I can tell you, in the past 10, 15 years, I went from somebody who has no need for any quote-unquote assistive devices to needing glasses. Now, I was just checking out and working with a startup from Taiwan on hearing, combining hearing aid with earpod, right? So this is a trend, especially in Europe. You got Italy and Spain already over 25% of their population over age 65. So you can just see the wave of a consumer or a citizen demands for technology. So that is one of the mega trends. Legislation, I know that there has been a lot of us webinar on IAAP on the legal ramification, whether it's a Section 508, the US procurement law, to EU 376, to the Canadian law. Around the world, we see more and more legislation, and that's because it's a result of, I attribute to the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disability in 2006. And I was very honored to represent the entire IT industry to address the UN, and then also lobby for the US Senate as a expert witness at the testifying at the US Senate on why this is so important for the United States to participate in CRPD. So legislation is going to be a driver. And then social expectation. When I don't like to say retire, because that makes me sounds really old. So I said, when I graduated from IBM in 2016, that was at the height of a lot of the inclusion movement. If you recall, that was the beginning of the Black Lives Matters, the Me Too movement, and GLBT and all that. And you can just sense that the both at the employee level, there is and also at the society level, the drive to have inclusion in an authentic way is unstoppable, right? I mean, so I think any business, as you go forward, you really have to think about how do you remain real and authentic, because it's going to affect your ability to attract the talent. I mean, there's a Deloitte research that even though everybody's talking about inclusion, I think the survey says of 5,000 employees they surveyed, I think more than 70% or close to 70% feel like their executive are not walk the talk. They're talking the talk, but not walk the talk. So I think you're going to see a very strong, both from the employee and also from consumer perspective, how the inclusion needs to be authentically implemented through everything. So it could be through their website access or to their mobile apps, and all the way to their product design, to their human resource policy of the recruitment, making sure it's not biased, for example. So it's going to create a whole kind of ecosystem of opportunities, frankly. And just like the environmental movement on the green movement side. So I believe that these are the mega drivers that if we can put inclusion in this kind of context and discuss it with a senior executive like the CEOs or the board members, and that's something that they can understand, right? And last but not the least is technology. When I started with IBM back in the 70s, we were in the period of what we call the mainframe period. And at that time, what you work on is what we call the system optimization, right? And in my book, I actually talked about, you go to IBM sales school selling mainframe, one of the first things they teach you is, remember 3 words, RAS, R-A-S. R stands for reliability, A stands for availability, S stands for serviceability. So these are like three major characteristics, the mainframe system or computer system that we always try to design to these high standard of high reliability, high availability, and high serviceability. Now, fast forward, we're in 2019, we know the technology has moved from the mainframe being the big box, in the back office to in your front pocket with your iPhone or your Android phone, right? Everybody's carrying the equivalent of a mainframe in your pocket. And today that we're designing to, for example, a different criteria. And today, in what I call is a PSA, right? Privacy, security, and in my view, accessibility, right? So PSA has to be, because these are characteristic of a personal experience that everybody has to think about. Why? Because there's this whole movement of consumerization of the technology. And also, so by definition, once you consumerize it, that means everybody will have access to the technology. It also enables you to do personalized experience technology. So it's not an accident. Everybody's talking about personalized banking, personalized education, personalized healthcare, and so on. So we're just at the beginning wave of that whole miniaturization of technology and personalization of technology. So if you're talking about personalization being one of the biggest differentiator for your product and services or your goods in the marketplace, then the personalization means person, meaning human. And who better understand the human design and human desire, human intricacy or human nuances of experience than, for example, accessibility experts such as yourself who's on the phone. So to me, instead of viewing this whole topic as a compliance, it is very, very important that we actually move this up the value chain, so to speak, and really make sure that we actually understand that this is not just about compliance, that this is beyond compliance. This will become, and I truly believe that's why I kind of started my own company on this, that this will be the differentiating factors for company for sustainability. So the next chart kind of speak to what I mentioned a little bit, is that we are at the point where technology has to think human, and has to be made human, and that we have to put a human first in everything we do. And this actually translate into, Christopher mentioned, you had a series on bias, right? I mean, I just gave a talk in Geneva a couple of weeks ago on moderating a panel on artificial intelligence. If you think about it, artificial intelligence is made of two things, right? They are made of machine learning, logics or algorithm, and the other side is data. And so by definition, if we're going to program the next, the AI to help humanity, we better be sure that the design logic, is such a way that we have diversity that built in, right? And then if we think that in many cases the AI or robots are there to help human, then who better can provide the best use cases and from the experience standpoint from people with disability of across the board. I mean, in Japan they're already building care robots, right? And no offense, somehow somebody like a 25-year white male, somehow their sense of care or the nuance of the robot programming probably is not going to be as somebody who has been a mother, has cared for either young children or elderly. So the whole logic with design thinking for that robot on the algorithm side has to have a diversity built in. And on the other side is data set. We have to make sure that we as a constituents really provide input and then data. So when the big data comes in, to digest or to create the pattern recognition, that our point of view and our experience. When I say our, meaning representing the broad base of people with disability, which is, we all know is a 15% or 1.2, 1.5 billion people out there. So there's lots and lots of opportunity, out there, but it's upon all of us to really raise the discussion to the kind of a higher level, and then really challenge the decision makers or leaders to think through this implication. And the next chart really kind of just give you a sense of when I talk to executives of a large or small organization. And remember, in the definition of authentic inclusion, I talked about you have to have a holistic approach, right? So I always ask them, do you, everybody embrace inclusion, but do you have, and can you envision, right? And when you start thinking about envisioning, meaning, does your business vision or your business strategy have, inclusion in this case, inclusion in general, right? In this case, including people with disability, but I'm actually for this idea that, it's really a human first thinking. It's all about, if we think human first, then people with disability actually will rise to the top. And so you want to have a vision and strategy, and then you absolutely should have, as a business or an institution, need to think about, do you have research and innovation in play, right, to support this? And then of course your product and your development and your marketing, your sales, marketing things like, for example, is your audio or your video, which everybody uses as a part of their marketing collateral, is that caption. It's just simple things like that, but it matters, right? And then is it throughout your corporate function like HR, legal, or finance, And I remember when I was in IBM, one of my biggest supporter and sponsor, and actually two, fundamental sponsors on day one, I decided I have to go after, is actually the CIO and the CFO, right? Because one really owns the technology, the other person owns the purse. So it's really, and this is beyond legal, because the legal is there because they know what's going on, right? But how do you make sure that you actually can operationalize it and to have a value proposition that will pass, for example, the inspection of the CFOs, who tend to be very, very, they can be very tough to get by. But on the other hand, if you have them as your sponsor, if you can win them over, then that makes a huge difference. And then that's, to me, this is such an important a player of the holistic approach. So anyway, so this kind of lead to the kind of a last chart, which is, if we can really think of this, as a holistic way of approaching inclusion, not just as, like I mentioned, as a compliance or HR initiative, and think of it as a disruptive innovation, then there's no question that you have to embed it into your business strategy. And if you do that, you will be creating, because everything when I talk to the executives, it's about your future, right? This is not about the past. We certainly need to deal with the past, which actually some of the compliance services and the solution that already is quite prevalent in our industry. But how do you think about the future, right? How do you compete in the future? So this message in authentic inclusion drives disruptive innovation is really challenging companies, large and small, to really think about how do you build a enterprise or a company of the future, and then knowing those mega trends are going to hit you, and then how do you sustain your profit. And my proposition or my hypothesis or my belief is that you have to have a principle and purpose alignment in order to do that. So I don't know whether we have another chart or not, but after that,
I believe that's it, Frances.
Okay.
So we've got some time for questions and answers. I want to go back briefly to your discussion about the CFOs and the CIOs, and the strategies that you used and maybe the communication techniques that you use, because they're very different folks. They think very differently. The objectives and the jobs are very differently. Do you have any additional information that you could kind of drill down on to give us some insight into that? If I was going into my CFO and trying to sell, a specific initiative going through my organization, how would I go about that?
So in this case, the first person, CFO, they're very concrete, right? I mean, you can go in to say, oh, please invest in, in something general. They want very specific, that they can put it in the spreadsheet, right? And that they can measure. So what I did was that first is I look across the spectrum, and as you can imagine, we have many requests from different constituencies, right? And what I did was that I actually brought all the different constituencies, for example, the blind employees, the deaf employees, cognitive, and mobility challenge IBM employees, and brought them together and asked them to help us to prioritize. Because before that, we just, every day we get different requests. And so I brought them together with the support of the CFO and the CIO to say, okay, our intent is to come up with a point of view that everybody can rally around, right? And in that case, we actually identify one key area that everybody can relate to and everybody can benefit from if we do it right, which is a better accommodation process, right? So it's building a workplace accommodation solution that can cut across 170 countries where IBM operated in, and 24/7 self-service. So we embark on that journey to build out a global accommodation system. And because of that, then I have a very concrete proposal to go to the CFO to say, this is what we want to do. Oh, by the way, this is a multi-year, multi-million-dollar proposal, right? So we scoped it out. We know what it is, but we have the support of the CIO. And because the CIO, of course, their responsibility is making sure every employee in IBM, can perform. So, so I think one of the key things is that you have to be very strategic about identifying area where there has measurable impact, right? And then you can articulate the impact to both the business. You have to have a metrics and measurement, right? In this case, it's employee retention, it's productivity, and so on and so forth. And then once you get a project going, what I call the marquee project or anchor project, and then people actually see and believe through the review process, they gain a lot more insight, and then they become, over the years, like I said, that my CFO become my biggest supporter.
That's great. I think we have a couple questions. Kevin?
This is Rachel here. We do have a few questions came in to the Q&A. The first one from Philip asks, the PSA acronym you mentioned, what did each letter stand for?
Okay, actually P for privacy, S for security, and A for accessibility. In the technology industry today, I think privacy and security probably are the most talked about. If you ask Mark Zuckerberg, every day he's thinking about the privacy issues, right? And because it matters to every single person. And so my view is that accessibility should be right there along with privacy and security.
Okay, thank you very much. And we had one other question from Michael, asked, how important is an ROI deck containing actual numbers?
I have actually mixed feelings about ROIs. To me, ROI sometimes is necessary if you are, if you're dealing, frankly, mid-level to mid-higher level, right? Because those are executives who are paid to do operation. They're measured on annual performance. So things like ROI give them a very concrete metrics. So if you are a company that already on the journey of already have the top-down buy-in, then ROI is a way just to keep track of your progression. But if you are not, if you're a company that's not really embarking or not really embracing authentic inclusion authentically, ROI could, frankly, has a double-edged sword, right? I mean, I remember when I first got into the accessibility business, and I see a lot of passion, in this business because maybe it's a lot of advocate, kind of actions. And I remember one of the senior executives said to me, make sure you don't get caught in this, what they call the itty business. And I said, what is the itty business? And he said, things like productivity, quality, availability. These are very hard to measure items. And the problem is you can come back with the itty. Let's say I am 90% productive, and they can say, well, you should have been 95%, because it is not an absolute number. So one has to be very mindful that, and that's why I actually believe that at the core, this has to be a mindset issue. In other words, you cannot prove your way into inclusion, because inclusion is a state of mind, a point of view, that a executive sometimes either gets it or sometimes they don't get it, right? So it depends situationally. I think ROI can be useful, like I said, in certain situation, but in other situation, when you are trying to really change the thinking. And I always say that fundamentally, and actually, my whole book, the construct is that I really want to be able to engage the top of the business in a dialogue so that can think differently about this topic. Because usually at the top level, if you're a really CEO, you actually have a vision or you go by your instinct, I mean, you do need some numbers to support that, but you go by your gut feel. And that's part to some extent, we cannot discount the power of that kind of a intangible belief.
Okay, thank you for that. We did have a few more questions come in. Do you want to continue with the questions for another minute?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, so from Charles, wanted to know, what should I consider instead of profit since I work for a government agency?
I think for the government, it has to be citizen experience, right? And in this case, there is a productivity aspect of accessibility, because especially if you're in the U.S. government, in this case, you actually have more metrics, whether it's a procurement metrics like Section 508, or now we're beginning to have the hiring metrics of people with disability. And I know that the government, at least the U.S. government right now, it's really moving beyond just setting up legislation and policies and wanting to operationalize inclusion. And know that just because I just gave a keynote at GSA, at the Human Services Conference in October, and we are talking about the CIO, the federal government CIOs, are beginning to really trying to not just kind of talk about this topic, to see how they can introduce a different way of thinking within their organization. So I think citizen engagement is actually one of the biggest. And the very first project that I did, actually, this is back in 2004, 15 years ago, was actually with the city of Austin, right? I mean, in today's term, it's called Accessible City. But the city of Austin, they actually figured out that if they have accessible website, then their citizen can self-serve. They can pay taxes, they can pay water bill, easier. So we actually installed one of our technology on their website called Homepage Reader, and easy web browser. This is the early version of making personalize their website to be for low vision or for blind. And I mean, if City of Austin can justify that, I'm sure, other organization can justify that as well.
Okay. And one final question. Can you mention again the title of the book you were talking about?
Oh, the title of my book, it's called Authentic Inclusion Drives Disruptive Innovation. It's I guess I can give a plug. It's on Amazon. It's on Barnes and Noble. It has a Kindle version you can download. So the book was published last year, and I will be speaking at CSUN. For those of you who will go to CSUN, very excited the CSUN has invited me to speak there. And also this past year, this is I think it's a proof point of how this topic is getting mainstream. Like I mentioned, I published my book around this time last year. Just in January 3rd, CES, Consumer Electronics Show, for those of you who know, it's the biggest tech show in Las Vegas every year, invited me to speak about my book there, and then followed by South by Southwest in Austin in March. So it goes to show that there is actually interest, and also I think that this whole inclusion, digital inclusion with very succinct, knowledge base like the IAP audience has, of making web and mobile and actually future technology, whether it's VR or XR, accessible, is getting very much of people are beginning to pay attention.
Okay, that looks to be the last of the questions. I don't see anything in the chat or any hands up, so we can go ahead and continue. Thank you.
Christopher, you are on mute.
I'm sorry. I hope you could read lips, possibly. So you talked earlier about somewhat the ROI and got into that a little bit. In your book, you mentioned you have a section regarding profit and versus purpose. And you spent a little bit of time talking about the Impact 500. Do you recall that?
Yep.
And just, again, spending a little bit more time on this concept of profit versus purpose. I mean, what do you see the primary hurdles for companies working towards engaging this philosophy, this Impact 500 philosophy?
I think in general, I'm an eternal optimist from the East, And if you look at the society right now, I think there's a huge discussion or debate about whether we have, too much concentration of wealth, for example, at the 1%. The rest of the world is not participating in the wealth, distribution, right? I mean, so this whole the whole kind of movement for the past maybe 30 years on the profit-driven approach of the capitalism, in its ultimate form, has not necessarily generated equity or fairness, or and frankly generated a lot of societal problems, right? So, and then some of the issues actually, some of the extreme profiteering gets exacerbated by, for example, a lot of tech company and startup, because tech industry, if you look at some of the fastest growing tech industry actually own so much wealth. So I again, part of my have always been my interest, and also my kind of skill sets is kind of strategic kind of perspective at looking at the landscape. There is a movement, I think, even in Silicon Valley. Actually, the term Impact 500 came out of my discussion with a very successful venture capitalist, VC. I mean, we're already seeing there is social investment, social enterprise kind of construct coming up. And so there's an idea that, actually Michael Porter, for those of you who don't know him, you might want to look him up. He's one of the influential business school. He still teaches at, I think, a Harvard Business School. Even back in 2005 or 2007, he published a white paper talking about, the capitalism as we know it today is not going to survive. We have to have a shared purpose, right? In other words, so he was the kind of first person call out that we need to have a shared purpose. And then just last month, for the first time, if you Google Business Roundtable, which is one of the organization, the Fortune, I would say Fortune 500 or company, all kind of are a member of. This is a place where they exchange, ideas and things like that. And for the first time, they took out a full-page ad, and I saw it in the Wall Street Journal by Business Roundtable. I think led with the Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan Chase, and CEO like IBM, Gino Rometty, and everybody's on the same page in that they talked about the company's responsibilities, not just to the shareholder, but also has to have purpose, right? So I think you begin to see a shift or beginning of a thinking of a company to know that, we have to begin to think about how to balance profit and against purpose. So for those people who are kind of naysayers to say, oh, Francis, you're too idealistic, about this whole thing. No, because I spent my entire life on the business side of the world, right? I mean, what I can say is that maybe because of the research training we had, you see beyond what's in front of you, right? Today we still have a lot of kind of a profit-driven, kind of almost to the point of a greed, but there is a different thinking beginning to emerge, and I think all of us collectively, which actually points to, individually we do have a responsibility, as Christopher, I mentioned that in my book, like how do we help to drive this movement, not to the point of just, kind of chastising people who wants to drive profit, but really educate them, in the sense that, having purpose is not in conflict with profit. You can have, profit and purpose integration. And frankly, that is going to be the secret formula of I think, the future of business. So the Impact 500 is based on that belief that it's beyond, you have to measure the impact holistically, not just shareholder profit, but begin to think about the societal impact, human impact, and all that.
That's great. Thank you, Francis. I mentioned earlier that IWP has been working towards strategic leadership and accessibility initiative. And I had some conversations at the very beginning about this. And this task force that we pulled together, is trying to develop the job roles in the sense of what it would be to be a strategic leader in accessibility, with the idea that we might do a micro certification down the road about this. It's still yet to be seen. I'm curious, when I was in Austin with you recently, you described, I'm assuming it's a theory, I'm not sure what to call it exactly, but your IHT.
Okay.
And could you spend some time on just talking about this theory that you have, which I was quite intrigued about?
Sure. I mean, I think for all the, especially I think the IAP audience, a lot of them are technology first and foremost, right? And so they have what I call the domain knowledge, very deep domain. They probably are like the expert in creating accessible website and really know area well and this and that, So this is what we in the kind of the business leadership kind of talent definition is what we call the I-shaped individual, just like the alphabet I, very deep-rooted knowledge. A PhD like yourself, you're an I person, like my husband is an I person, right? Can go very deep. But in order to really create, you can stay, and it's perfectly fine to be deep domain person, But if you have aspiration to really create influence, right, or change behavior or change thinking, then I think it's very important that you begin to develop what I call the H type of thinking, and also look for job opportunity to give you the additional connection. So it's just like the alphabet H. So you can have a deep domain knowledge, but you begin to develop with horizontal skill sets that you can connect with other domain experts and be able to influence the domain expert. So this is really speaking to the technologies beginning to develop management skills or influencing skills, right? And then from there, ultimately, if you want to become a real high impact, in many cases, in organization construct that tend to be the executive level, right? So when you get to the executive level, by definition, you have more impact, you have more influence, you have more resources and all that. If that's your aspiration, then you have to think about beginning to develop what I call the T-shape thinking and also behavior. T-shape, again, just like the alphabet T, says that you actually have a horizontal kind of a skill set, meaning you have broad enough of a knowledge, or not necessarily, if not deep knowledge, exposure to all parts of the business. So going back to the chart, you know, do you have exposure? Have you had an assignment to learn how your company think about their strategy? You know, or potentially, do you have a job in outside of your accessibility department and maybe go into research or into product development? So I think one has to be very mindful to have at the minimum exposure, you know, ideally actually have a real working experience beyond your domain, in this case, accessibility space, in order to round off your overall management and also influencing, you know, kind of both knowledge and the skill sets. So that's the kind of idea of the I, H, and T.
That's great. I think we have another question, correct, Rachel?
Yes, we do. Let me see. So Michael wants to know a strategy that describes the how of a mid-level manager to approach his company C-suite with an accessibility program suggestion.
I think the how, I mean, at least for me, I've always the best way is to actually take an initiative that nobody has done before, but that you know is aligned with the company's direction, and then just work it so that so give you a number one, and hopefully the result is positive, and then give you something to go to your upper management to say, hey, look, I've created something that's different. So give you an example. We know design is really a big talk of town now, right? I mean, everybody talked about design in and all that. So I and my organization we saw the design actually as critical. This all came about when actually IBM as a company changed strategy, right? I mean, if you're in a company, it's very common that the company would change strategy. For many years, IBM built everything in-house. So we actually had a very good process of building accessibility into everything. And then IBM changed its strategy to say, well, we're going to buy companies, right? And so all overnight, you know, a lot of influx of a company, 99.999%, these companies are not accessible. So then we start, you know, we have a problem, we have a business problem, right? How do we make these companies accessible when all our previous processes were designed for home-built, homegrown, you know? So we have to think really hard. In this case, you know, I decided that one of the only way I can or we collectively, my team can influence is that we got to go to the beginning of the process, which is, you know, when a company comes in, you know, got brought in, we go through the IBM, you know, kind of a design process because they want the experience of the customer of using IBM product the same. So we decided to really go after the IBM design team, right? And to work with them and to embed accessibility into the design language. We didn't say you got to come to us because that would be too long and too hard, frankly. Instead, we said, well, we'll go to you. Let us talk to your designers. So we start building accessibility into the design thinking. So what do I mean by that? So color palette, designer, they're very much into the aesthetic of colors, right? And we know that with the W3 WCAG 2.0 and all the standards, there's certain ratio of color contrast can be had. We create a tooling so that they can do the automatic, instead of picking a pink of this shade, they just move over to pick another shade, actually will meet the color contrast. So things like that. And then we did a first of a kind of a collaboration. And because it's a strategic part of the business, it gave us the opportunity to expose the benefit and also the impact accessibility has on the business. So I think if you're in the middle management, you want to pick and choose a project where you can align with your business focus, your strategic focus, especially from the very top, and then build the differentiation, build a disruptive kind of a perspective or approach inside that particular initiative to gain gain the business recognition.
That's great. Thank you, Frances. We've only got a couple more minutes. I've got a slew of questions here, so I'm going to have to pick one. Wow. So when I was in London at Tech Show Pro, I chaired a panel of leaders in accessibility from Google, from Apple, from Microsoft, and from Barclays Bank. And one of the questions that came in from the audience was a pretty powerful question. So I'm going to throw it at you, all right, and put you on the spot.
Okay.
Can you share what the decision that you made that may have not been the right decision, maybe around authentic inclusion, and what did you learn from that?
Say it again. What's the question again?
Can you tell us give an example of a decision that you made with maybe at IBM or with your company right now that you probably would take back and do something differently around accessibility, obviously, and what did you learn from that?
Well, that is a tough one.
It is a tough one. It's like an interview question.
I know. I think one of the things was that in my early years, I think I took a little too long in understanding the importance of tooling, right? Of creating automated tooling to help, for example, our developers in terms of their adoption of accessibility. Like I mentioned, I believe that that at the time I believe that first we need to work on them thinking differently, and therefore if they think differently, because the programmer owns the code, right? Because they're making a decision on a day in, day out basis, and that if we can get to them on the mindset level, then they will do the right thing, so to speak. I think I underestimated the complexity and also the time pressure they're under. And my team at the time had, proposed, we built certain automated tools, so automatic checking, validation and all that. I think I wish I had, kind of understood the scenario earlier, and that had put more resources in that, because later on, what I realized, there was a phrase actually that began to come up in from our development communities, like tools, not rules, right? Because we were creating a lot of checklists. We actually have the checklist down to very definitive level, like at the concept design level, at the at the plan level, at the development level, at the deployment level, but the checklist is overwhelming, you know. I mean, for us, for our team, because this is our day job, so, you know, we were happily creating more and more checklists, especially with new standards coming out, but we actually forgot our customer in this case, you know. So this is something that I always remind myself, you know, that, you know, you can never, whatever you do, you have to remember who's your audience, who are you serving. And then we kind of tried to ratify that. And I think if you go to the IBM website, there's still a lot of, you know, tools that they kind of open source to the public. And of course, now there is a lot of commercial tools out available. But anyway, that's one thing that like I said, I wish I had, you know, more, I've thought about it more and be actually more sensitive to the audience that we were helping.
Thank you, Francis. We are at the top of the hour. I really appreciate you sharing that. Francis is going to be at CSUN, correct?
Yes.
I think you're a major keynote speaker there.
Yeah, I'll be talking, yes, about my book and some of the topics.
Okay, great. Well, thank you again. I'll let Rachel close it out. But Francis, I can't tell you how much I appreciate your time today and your wisdom. And
well, thank you. Thank you for this honor, and always love to come back to, you know, this is the base, right? This is where we all operated from.
Yeah.
So
thank you.
Thank you
Very much.
That's great. Thank you for everybody for joining us. Christopher, can you forward to the last slide, or the second to the last slide? There we go. So there is a webinar feedback survey form, and the link is right there in the presentation, but we will also send that out to everybody with the recording and link to and the download of today's presentation. You can follow IAAP on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook now. And if you're interested in learning more about our webinars, I think there's one more slide. We're getting ready to launch our 2020 Organizational Professional Development webinar series that will probably kick off in January or February, but we are working on the details. There are some sample of the titles coming up on your screen on the right. We're hoping to have the information on our website and open registration probably within the next week or two, but we will be sending out information about how you can join us on those future webinars as well. And thank you again to Christopher and Francis for the great webinar today and all the great questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Rachel. And thank you to the captionist for all the work that you're doing for us. Take care, everyone.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye, Francis.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.